a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
Hello and welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Japan is set to launch its new National Intelligence Bureau on July the 31st, with Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi chairing the inaugural National Intelligence Council. The move represents the most sweeping overhaul of Japan's intelligence system since World War II, creating a centralized body to coordinate intelligence across police, public security, defense, and foreign affairs agencies under the Prime Minister's leadership. Some analysts believe that it may blur the boundaries of national security and be exploited to build a full-spectrum war preparedness system, as Japan's wartime intelligence apparatus continues to shape public debate even today. Now, with regional security tensions intensifying, defense policies evolving, arms export restrictions being erased, and constitutional revision remaining part of the geopolitical agenda, what does this reform really signal? How might it shape Japan's future security policy? And what implications could they have on regional stability? To answer all these questions and more, today we're joined in Tokyo, Japan by Lin Tai-wei, Professor of Business at Soka University in New London, Connecticut. We have Alexis Dudden, Professor of History at the University of Connecticut. In Shanghai, Joseph Mahoney, Professor of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University. And we have Professor Rong Ying, Chair Professor at Sichuan University. Now, Professor Dudden, let me go to you first. Japan's intelligence system is now undergoing a dramatic shift. Previously, intelligence was gathered separately by multiple agencies and coordinated through the Cabinet Intelligence and Research Office. Now, under the new system, the intelligence from across the government will be integrated by the National Intelligence Bureau and reported directly to the Prime Minister. How significant do you think this reform is, and what exactly does Japan hope to achieve?
Excellent question. Since 1952, Japan's intelligence gathering has largely relied on the United States military and has followed its lead, has learned what it wants. The bureau that had existed for Japan had no legal mandate to legislate on intelligence matters. So to me, the significant shift with this new bureau agency, however we're translating it, is that they will be able to suggest legislation through the Prime Minister. And again, remember, whatever Prime Minister is there can direct that. But the idea that an intelligence bureau can suggest legislation to the Parliament is a significant shift.
But what can it possibly lead to? Why do you say this is significant?
Well, because it's so vague. We don't know what will be determined as a vital state matter. For example, will it be primarily domestic? What counts as foreign interference? All of these terms are left vague. For example, there's no cadre of foreign intelligence officers as such in Japan. There is no equivalent of a James Bond. That's just sort of not something that is Japanese. But there are people, okay, let me put this differently. It's notable that the new director of this agency is a national police officer. I mean, he's been head of the national police. He doesn't come from the foreign ministry, and yet he's now mandated, or he's in charge of gathering information about foreign security, foreign matters. But many people in Japan are concerned that this is primarily going to be focused on domestic issues. Who counts as doing things contrary to what the government of Japan wants? It's so vague, it is almost difficult to describe what the mandate is. And now we know that the Prime Minister will be directing the council that directs the Intelligence Bureau to do its job.
Great insights. Now, Professor Rong Ying, what do you think is the scope and mandate of this newly established National Intelligence Bureau of Japan?
Well, I think it's clear from the press reports and also I think the debate that has been going on in Japan. The oppositions in particular, I think there are great and many concerns and questions unanswered. I think apart from the concerns, domestic concerns, the possibilities of infringement on the privacy, human rights, and the reputation or replications of the pre-war times, the so-called the notorious Tokoko, the special high police, which I think primarily aimed at suppressing the oppositions, mobilizing the wars, and so on and so forth. I think the readings of observers or analysts outside Japan is very much on its regional impact, its security sort of implications, and the ultimately in the end the directions of Japan in the wake of the serious sort of steps or attempts to dilute, to I think get away the so-called the pacifist constraints, which is largely I think the security system, security design, and the intelligence agency or Japan's intelligence sort of design. Intelligence system was, at least I think for many observers outside Japan, was deliberately designed to be in a way that it would not play a role in support Japan's commitment to a peaceful state, for not to reduce the possibility of remilitarizing and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, it is true. I think that many ambiguities, uncertain questions. But if you look at the trend, look at the signals, look at the messages and the way that has been presented in making the case to have a kind of a reshuffle, overhaul of the intelligence system, to have a more centralized, kind of a robust intelligence sort of agencies is very much an issue of concern. And I think call for vigilance and I think questions to be
That's
asked.
certainly the fear, right? Japan's post-war intelligence system was deliberately designed so as to avoid the concentration of power that existed before 1945. And now Japan is moving towards a centralized intelligence structure, getting away from its previous paradigms. Joseph, does that concern you? How should we understand this new organization? What is your rating of it?
Well, I think that there are several concerns. I think the first thing is that clearly this is more than just an administrative tweak. I think it seems like it's moving towards dismantling Japan's decades-long fragmented post-World War II intelligence silos, again, placing full centralized authority under the prime minister for the first time since the previous militarist era. Now, pacifist critics say there were no gaps that needed to be addressed, but according to supporters, who, it may be fair to label them militarist, it addresses several, such as interagency information blockages that crippled coordinated responses to hybrid threats, and the lack of a unified body to steer overseas espionage operations. Now, strategically, it removes what some called an intelligence bottleneck, holding back Japan's 14 straight years of record defense spending, perhaps enabling a seamless alignment with its 2026 offensive military buildup and deeper embedding into U.S.-led Indo-Pacific intelligence sharing frameworks. Now, some have said that this would allow Japan to become more autonomous, but at the same time, it also allows them to become more embedded. So there are these concerns that it marks a return of Japanese militarization. This is certainly a talking point that we hear a lot in China and in other parts of the region. And there are concerns about Tokyo's complicity with U.S.-led containment strategies and imperial overreach in East Asia. But I would like to add one thing that certainly we've seen this being talked about extensively by Chinese netizens and others, and that is, the government officially announced July 31st as the launch date. And this date coincides numerically with the wartime Unit 731, a fact that has drawn strong criticism, again, from China and from Chinese civil society groups. Now, the government has not addressed this historical association, leading to perceptions of insensitivity and the broader concern that the government is grossly deaf to the cries of history.
Now, Joseph, let me ask you, how much of a role do you think the United States, Washington, the national security apparatus in Washington is behind the newly set up Japanese intelligence organization?
I can't answer that question authoritatively. I think that we've seen the U.S. taking a two-handed approach. On the one hand, I think the U.S. has long enjoyed the fact that it was able to dominate Japan and even exploit Japan with the hegemony that it exercises over Japan. We've seen Trump kind of encouraging militarization, but also trying to push back against it, as we saw, according to some reports, after his recent summit with President Xi Jinping in Beijing. So I think that there is a concern that Japan could become a bit more independent, and this could threaten U.S. hegemony. But at the same time, I think there's also a concern that Japan is being led by the nose by the U.S. to advance an anti-China containment strategy in East Asia.
Hey there, global listeners. Get ready for the hottest discussions on the airwaves. Roundtable, your passport to the heart of China's buzzing society. Pressing issues, lifestyle trends, and impactful policies, we're tackling them head on with wit, wisdom, and a whole lot of fun. Discover the real China through the eyes and voices of its people. Gain a unique global perspective on topics that resonate universally. Tune in and turn up the excitement dial on Roundtable as we bridge gaps and break barriers one discussion at a time. Don't just listen, be transformed.
Professor Lin, very quickly, do you want to respond to this question? How much of a role do you think the United States is behind all this? And then secondly, of course, your take on this newly set up organization and the pattern that it represents for Japan's posture.
Well, it is a kind of response to a large segment of the domestic population that they are facing a multipolar polycrisis world in which the world has become very dangerous. And therefore, there's a need to gather accurate and precise information. And this leads to the second point, that there is a structurally priority for this development in the sense that they don't want atomized individual components to take care of intelligence because it can lead to a lack of coordination. Previously, the intelligence was collected by the Cabinet Office as well as public security agencies. And so by collating all these institutions into one, it hopes that it can gather accurate information structurally that allows it to make a decision. Finally, it is also under a lot of what the Japanese call gaiatsu, or foreign pressure, because not just Japan, but almost all like-minded, partners and allies of the U.S. is becoming components of a larger network of intelligence gathering operations for more precise information in a polycrisis world. And certainly, for example, Republic of Korea and Japan are involved in GSOMIA, intelligence gathering, trilateral Camp David style kind of intelligence sharing. And both Republic of Korea and Japan are also part of the NATO IP4, Indo-Pacific 4, exchange of information with NATO forces on cybersecurity information and data. And also through its sort of relations with Australia and the US, there is also exchange of information with the Five Eyes organization that the US has. So in order to sort of be on par in terms of benchmarks and standards with those organizations, structurally, Japan has to embed itself and change its format in order to be able to be part of this, global network of intelligence gathering for more accurate information, precise information, in order to preserve peace.
Right. Now, thanks for all these perspectives, especially taking us into the Japanese thinking. Professor Dutton, is it conceivable that Japan can set up such an intelligence organization without a green light from Washington?
No, it's not. Not under the terms of the security agreement. However, what Japan wants is to act in Japanese national interests, and what the United States wants is, like any country, like China, like France, to act in its own national interests. And there's huge debate in Japan and many of America's allies right now that the United States is walking away. And so what counts as in Japan's national interest is up for Japanese people to define. But I think what's important to understand, and if I could just augment my colleague's comments, this dates back to the 2014 enactment of the secrecy law. It's an expansion of that, and that was very much pushed by the United States. And that was pushed by the United States because for decades, Japanese officials had been, I think, remiss is probably the right word, in preserving military secrets. You've got the United States military stationed all over Japan, and it's highly permeable because Japan is notoriously lax in certain security arrangements. I think, and then what connects that moment to today is that law that is on the books is so vague that nobody knows what a state secret is. Nobody knows whether or not they're breaking the law in Japan as a researcher, as a civil, as a newspaper organization, because the term secret has yet to be defined. And that was backed by the United States. This also is backed by the United States, and Australia was actually the Australian ambassador currently in Japan with a security background was key in even drafting the legislation. But I think when you ask, is anything possible in Japan without the United States? Everything is possible in Japan without the United States, but not outside Japan. And so I think the concern for Japanese citizens right now is how this legislation impacts their own daily lives. Are they allowed to criticize their government without being called a foreign agent? Because, for example, nobody really understands how this is going to unfold because it has been rammed through, and it's so vague that the way that the fear is being whipped up, that foreign influence, and I'll be really brief, but the New York Times broke an enormous story literally the day before this legislation was enacted, that the government of Russia had put an office building a floor of an office building in downtown Tokyo to procure dual-use technology to export back to Russia to fight the war against Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government, again, we're talking about two allies of the United States, Ukraine, Japan. The Ukrainian government had presented Japan with evidence that technology, literally machinery, purchased in Japan, exported through third-party countries to Russia, had been part of the bombing campaigns against Ukraine. And this had been going on for years. And so Japan is notoriously lax in security. It's sort of it's unimaginable how easy it is to permeate. So from many perspectives, this is healthy for Japan to shore up its own baselines. However, what this agency is going to do is a wild card.
Thanks so much for this, letting us know this expose story. Now, Professor Rong Ying, talking about criticism and opposition inside Japan, there are many. For example, Koike Akira, Secretary General of the Japanese Communist Party, warned that such measure would increase public surveillance. Let's take a listen.
This is the first step toward other laws that would increase public surveillance. We plan to inform people about how dangerous this is and fight it.
How concerned should the Japanese people be, and also people in the neighborhood, such as Koreans, Chinese, and people in Russia?
I think as far as the debates, in Japan are concerned, I can fully understand. I think the concerns, the oppositions that is expressed by these people that particularly represented by the opposition parties. This is first and foremost because of the history, the historical, sort of memory of that Tokoko, agency that the notorious role in play. And secondly, it is very much related to the ambiguity. With it, a kind of deliberate ambiguity raised by, because of the establishment of this such a powerful, centralized intelligence agency directly under the prime ministership. This is something also related to the politicization of intelligence collection and analysis. I think should be an fact that Japan's intelligence collection and analyzing capability is not weak. The only problems it is being, as we discussed, it has been designed deliberately, as a deliberate way to prevent that politicalization, centralization for the purpose of the commitment. And the problem, I think, or the argument, the problematic side of the argument by Takaichi's Prime Minister Takaichi and their supporters, these right-wing conservative ones, is the fact that in Japan, as they are pushing for legislations, as they are restructuring the system, there's no, so far, talk or little talk about the oversight, the monetary system at the parliament and others, which is, I think, a system that we've seen in other countries we're talking about that. And the third thing, of course, for regional countries, because of history, because of the recent accelerated moves by the Japanese government, is that the implications for regional security. I think in the end, we were going to have in more mistrust or distrust, and more arms race, and more problems arising from that because of the intensified efforts and the concerns that Japan is moving toward the direction of remilitarization.
There's certainly a move to the right, without a doubt. Now, Joseph, the reform also highlights foreign intelligence of Japan, counterintelligence, and response to foreign influence activities, perceived or real. How do you think these measures taken together could they potentially impact the geopolitical landscape in East Asia and beyond?
Well, there are some concerns that, for example, Japan has deployed long-range missiles. That one of the things that this intelligence reform would do would be able to collect data, targeting data, that would enable the prime minister to perhaps aggress against opponents, or this will at least be a perception that many countries would be concerned about right now, including Russia, China, and perhaps others, certainly North Korea. So there are these, because things are so vague, because we don't really know what's happening, this is the concern. But to go back to the earlier point, this is part of a longer term trend. We certainly point the finger at this prime minister for accelerating these developments, and certainly the contemporary geopolitical milieu is kind of encouraging this in some respects, certainly from what we've seen coming from the United States. But it does go back to 2013, 2014. Some of the groundwork was laid there. And again, in 2022, when the Abe administration changed some of the security documents. So this is something that's been building along with the development of weapons systems. And this is something that is gravely concerning to the region, and whether or not it will spark, as my colleague from Sichuan noted, an arms race or greater regional insecurity.
Right, but this may not be the first step, actually. Prime Minister of Japan, Takaichi, Sanai Takaichi, has described the establishment of the National Intelligence Bureau as only, quote-unquote, the first step. So, Professor Lin, you're in Japan. Tell us about your reading of it. What is to follow? Could there be further reforms? Especially its anti-espionage legislation is posturing when it comes to intelligence gathering.
Well, in the 21 hours of debate between the ruling party and the opposition, one commitment that the opposition secured through this long debate in the parliament was for the chief cabinet secretary to commit informal answers to the committee that is debating with the government, that the government will compile a medium-term document on intelligence activities and report it to the parliament, and also make it transparent and public. The opposition party also committed the chief cabinet secretary to compile a long-term, not just medium-term, but a long-term strategy document on intelligence, and also follow the same procedure to report it to the parliament and make it transparent and public. So in this sense, this will be a sort of a way in which they can sort of oversight the new changes in the intelligence agency, particularly when it comes to collection and also provision of information. So this will assuage to a certain extent some members of the public when it comes to privacy or sort of political neutralities of organizations. And so this will assure some members of the opposition party and some members of the public about the future orientation of the reforms. And in addition, it is stated that during these debates and press media conference thereafter, the records of the National Intelligence Council proceedings will be produced and also curated as official documents under public records management rules, which again is another sort of oversight with regards to the activities of the new centralized agency.
All right, thank you all so much for your perspectives, and that will do it for this edition of The Hub. Thank you for tuning in.